Forum. My name is Bruce McFarlane. I'm one of the co-founders of BDC Partners, and I'm also the CEO of Blue Rock Group. So for those of you who haven't heard of Blue Rock, we're an entrepreneurial advisory firm. So we've got a multidisciplinary professional services business with a couple hundred people and an investment business as well. So I'm coming to you live from Australia's largest COVID-free state. So all of you Victorians, you must be very excited, but we've no active cases of COVID in Victoria yesterday, 24 double donut days. So all of you people from other states were saying, feeling sorry for poor Victorians. We're the leaders in the country at the moment. So I'm glad I've got my mask because now that can help me cover my head and cover the sun up. For my bald head, I see a couple other people that might like a mask like mine. Dave Lindsay is another one. He likes to use his mask. But for those of us in Victoria, we're very excited about the fact that we can leave our houses. So today, I'm just going to quickly introduce our other co-founders, and I don't know if I can see them all online, so hopefully they're joining soon. But the Honourable Mr. Bruce Bilson, he's just joining. So the former Federal Small Business Minister and also the Chairman of the FCA. Bruce is a champion of small business, and he was the 1982 most improved footballer at the Seaford Tigers footy club. So congratulations, Bruce, on that award. That was a prestigious award, and welcome today.
Thank you, B1. It's B2 wishing everyone a fantastic webinar today, and thank you all for joining us.
Now, I can't even see him, but hopefully one of our other co-founders, not so honourable, Mr. John Sully. He's an entrepreneur extraordinaire. He was the former owner of Michelle's Patisserie, and he's also one of Australia's leading experts in homeschooling from a golf course. So welcome to John. John's
Thank you.
Oh, there you are, mate. You are there.
I'm down the corner.
Oh, I can see you. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
And our fourth co-founder is our favourite leprechaun, David Lindsay. He's the founder of Salts of the Earth. He's the stunt double for Jamoan, and he's also the CEO of Blue Rock Partners, BDC Partners. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you very much, Bruce, and thanks everyone for joining us today.
So our franchising forum, so number one, we received some fantastic feedback from franchisors during lockdown on a couple of key points, but finding quality franchisees, despite increased inquiries, it was really difficult to find quality franchisees. And that's a theme pre-COVID, but it's also been intensified during COVID. The next major topic that we discussed in franchising forum number one was access to finance during the pandemic. We're in the middle of a global recession and financing was really difficult. We took that feedback on board, and then we spoke to all the banks, and we invited the big four banks and Judo to come along to our franchising forum number two. At that time, we had our banking bachelor, Darren from Frandata, help us share some information. It was almost like a love island of getting to know the big banks and Judo Bank and what they were looking for in financing for franchisors and franchisees. So that session was great. And if you missed that session, we do have a recording of that session as well, but there's some really good insights from the banks. Today, we're picking up on another one of the themes, which is franchise recruitment. So today's really a masterclass in franchise recruitment and best practice. I'm going to run through our speakers in reverse sex symbology order. So we've got Ben Hatton. Ben is the CEO of BDC Recruitment. Ben's up on the Gold Coast. He's at school. He's tragic on the Gold Coast. He's been there ever since his school days and just stuck it out. And he's a retired pro surfer. But we'll hear from Ben on the recruitment process. So welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Bruce, and thanks everyone for attending. Much appreciated.
We've got Tim Shaw. So Tim's the CEO of Gap Maps. And what I found that, working with Tim over the last few months, that Tim's a world leader in how to run a global tech business from regional Victoria with really crap internet. So welcome, Tim.
Thanks very much, Bruce. And thanks for organising today.
We've got Paul Carpenter as well. So welcome, Paul. Paul's the General Manager of Risk at Judo Bank. And I think like the Democrats during the 80s and 90s, Paul's, his role at Judo Bank is to really keep the bastards honest. So welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Bruce. I'm not sure how Bruce Bilson would feel about me being called a Democrat, but there we go.
The Democrat Party still exists. I'm not sure about that, but maybe we'll go to that another one. And our final special guest today. So Rebecca is in the US. So Rebecca is the president and chief scientist of Zoracle Profiling. So Rebecca, I lived in California in the 80s, and I learned pretty quickly not to talk about religion or politics. So we're going to leave religion and politics aside. We're going to talk about football and franchising. So a Californian, I'm a Raiders fan. And so we might talk about the fact that the Raiders are 6-4 and they're going pretty well this season, but probably more relevant for everyone is franchising. So Rebecca, how's the franchising sector in the US holding up during this, the next wave of COVID?
We're doing really well here in the US. Franchising does well during the recession. So ironically, we're up by about 30% in the usage of profiles, and that tells us franchisors are looking at candidates. So we're holding up really well here.
Great news, great news. So Rebecca, we've got quite a bit of time assigned to hear all about compatibility and the Zoracle profiling and how that tool works. So I'll throw to you and you can tell us all about it.
Would love to. If it's okay, I'd like to share my screen. Would that be good?
Great.
All right. Beautiful. So let's talk about profiling. So Zoracle, as you know, is in the profiling business. All we do is profiling in the franchise space. I love franchising, been doing this for 27 years. We have clients all different sizes, from baby franchisors to big franchisors. But I always come back to kind of the basics, which is there are 4 tenets of franchising. One is, do we have a replicable model? Will it play in Peoria, so to speak? And I know a lot of energy and time and money has gone for a franchisor to make sure it's a replicable model. Second, is it a viable market for that franchisee to open his or her location? And then, of course, is it the right location? And you're probably going to hear more about that a little bit later. But the space that we play in at Zoracle is it the right franchisee? We could have the perfect model. We could have a market that would justify enough end users to use our product or service. We could even have the perfect location. But if we have the wrong franchisee, things can go south pretty quickly. So that's the space that we play in. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about what I call the KISS method for predicting franchisee compatibility and performance. The first step, of course, is to distinguish the difference between what makes someone compatible and ultimately what performance is. So we do, and then the second step is to look at a meta-analysis approach to assessing your franchisees. An interview alone won't do it. A resume alone won't do it. A personality assessment alone won't do it. And then, of course, you want to determine the DNA of your right fit franchisee for your franchise concept. So there's 2 things you want to look at. First, is this individual compatible? In other words, are they folks that we can coexist with? We can work together without problems and without conflict. Do we have a like-mindedness between our franchisee and our franchise concept? The second piece you want to look at is, just because they're compatible does not necessarily mean they're competent, that they have the skills necessary to grow a business. So we want kind of this combination of compatibility. They fit within our organization, but they also are competent and they can run a successful business. They have the skills, the knowledge, the drive, the ability to grow that business. I point this out because if you only have competencies, which we can figure out through a resume and through a conversation, if they're competent, but they're not compatible, what you end up with is a lone wolf, somebody that's off doing their own thing and not following and embracing our systems. Or you end up with a renegade, someone who is going against the system and doing everything possible to make your life miserable. Or you have a prima donna. We have a whole bunch of those here in the US. Folks that somehow think they're special and unique and different and really don't need to be following the systems that a franchisor has spent all this energy creating. Now, on the other hand, if you have someone who's compatible, you have Hakuna Matata, right? You have, you know, this kumbaya kind of feeling. We all get along. We love going to conferences together. We take vacations together. So we can be compatible, but not have the skills to grow a business. Now, what happens if we have someone who's compatible, but is not competent? We have great retention. We can't get rid of them. They're going to stay with us. They're going to be happy. They're going to be satisfied. They're going to comply well. But it's going to be more expensive to support those folks because they're not performing as well. So we want both. We want them to be compatible and we want them to be competent. So how do we know that someone has these markers around compatibility and these markers around competencies? So you know when someone is a good fit, when your franchisee shares your values as a franchise concept and shares the values of your high performers. Shared values creates this basis for understanding, communicating, and exercising good judgment all the way out to your end user. So when the values of an organization are in alignment with the values of a franchisee and vice versa, we see again and again statistically much higher performance of our franchisees. So that's step one. Are they compatible in terms of the values that your franchisee has and the values that the franchise system possesses? Secondly, what is the current stage of growth of a franchise organization? According to Neil Churchill, L.A. Grenner, there are 5 predictable stages of growth that every franchisor goes through. And within each of those stages of growth, there are going to be crises. And if we navigate those crises perfectly, we can move to the next stage of growth. If we don't navigate those crises, oftentimes we fall back and we lose franchisees. So we want to look at a franchisor's current stage of growth and where they're growing. And we want to see how a franchisee is responding to that franchisor's current stage of growth. How are they fitting? And then equally important, we want to know, does this prospective franchisee fit within that franchisor's current stage of growth? So stage of growth has 5 kind of bigger markers, and I wanted just to give you a quick screenshot of it. But you know what stage of growth a franchisor is in based on the management style, which changes as we evolve, the organizational structure of that franchise system, the extent of the systems, formal or informal, that the franchisor has, and then also what the primary initiative or major strategic goals are of that franchise system. And then, of course, we also want to look at the concept originator, the founder, and how involved he or she is, because that will also change as a franchise system changes. So how a franchisee is responding to the current stage of growth is important. And of course, if a prospective franchisee fits within the current stage of growth. If they don't fit, we got challenges. The next thing you want to look at is what your culture is. You want to define what your culture is and what you're rewarding and what your best practices are, what your environment is, and how your current franchisees are echoing and mirroring that culture. And of course, once we can define what that culture is, does your prospective franchisee fit into the culture? They could be perfect in every other way, but they may not fit into your culture, and you're going to be abrasive to them, and they're going to be abrasive to you, and you're going to be unhappy with the overall situation. So you want to measure the culture that you are operating your businesses by and how folks are responding to it, and if your candidate will fit within your current culture. The next thing you want to consider when you're looking at your culture is the things that you are rewarding, and if this will ultimately be a culture that is sustainable as you grow. Early stage franchise systems typically have more of a family-oriented culture. As we grow, that isn't always possible. You also want to look at what we call at Zoracle a work style. You may call it a personality or communication style, leadership style. We happen to call it a work style. So you want to make sure that the franchisees that you are recruiting and bringing on board has similar work style as your high performers within your current franchise system. This will give you a better idea of what the pace is that franchisee is going to set, the focus and the priorities and the direction that franchisee is going to operate from, and with his employees and his vendors, and of course, ultimately with his customers. So to be compatible, we want to have shared values. We want to have fit well within a stage of growth, and we want to fit well within a culture, and we want to have a work style that is similar to the high performers. Now that kind of brings us to that, this is all compatibility, right? But what about the competencies? Some of which are hard competencies, like do they need sales skills? Do they need operational skills or finance skills or customer service skills? What exactly do your high performers possess in terms of skills? And what skills does your prospective franchisee need to fit well within the organization, ramp up well, and have year-over-year growth? So you want a franchisee that has complementary skill sets. In other words, what is the value package that we are bringing to the table as franchise systems? And what does the franchisee need to bring to the table? We want the franchisee strong where we are weak and weak where we are strong, so we have a great interdependent relationship with our franchisee. And I want you also to think, when you think of competencies, we typically think of competencies as marketing skills and sales skills and technical skills and marketing skills and all of those kinds of things. We call those hard competencies, but I want you to think about the softer competencies, the leadership skills, the conflict management skills, the collaboration skills, and building a team, and being a good change catalyst, and self-discipline and self-control and self-motivation. All of these are skills that a franchisee needs to possess in various degrees to fit well within a franchise system. What they need in one franchise system is going to be different than what they need in another. So complementary skills, by measuring them and then seeing how they complement what our value package is, will allow that franchisee to use his skills, whereas we're not being redundant doing things for them. So how do we go about doing all that? I call it the reverse engineering process. The best way to know if someone's going to be a good fit for you and do a better job than recruiting more of those is through a reverse engineering process. That's by looking at your current franchisees. We call it a spot on blueprint, where we get together with you and we spend some time with your leadership team deciding what some of the standards and benchmarks are that you're currently using for performance, and of course, looking at some customized ideals of what those performance markers should be. And then we assess all of your current franchisees. They take about a 15-minute assessment based on 7 sciences. I'm going to show that to you here in just a second. And then we determine from that, here are A players, here are B players, and here are C players. And our job is then to look at the corollaries and the causation of why did these 15 franchisees ramp up more quickly than these 35 franchisees? What caused that? And why are they having greater year-over-year growth? And why are they embracing our systems better? And what's causing them to retain their employees better or have greater referral sources? So those are the questions we want to ask. By looking at our current franchisees and doing a blueprint on them, What's our how are high performers, mid performers, and low performers similar, and how are they different? We call it a blueprint process. And the way that we do that is we use a meta-analysis approach. This is the biggest difference with Zoracle than other tools that are available out there. Instead of using a single science, we use 7 statistically validated sciences and studies. The first, of course, is a values-based logic that comes out of Stanford Research Institute. It looks at the why people do things, and it looks at their motivations. The second piece of science comes from Ellie Grenner and Neil Churchill's work in the Carruthers Institute. It measures the stages of growth of the franchise organization. The third piece of science comes out of the University of Michigan. It measures, it quantifies, it delineates exactly what causes a particular franchisor to have a particular kind of culture. And then for the work style, or what you might also call a personality style, we use William Marston's work in the Harvard Business School work to assess the personality and the work style of your current franchisees. Then we use a core competency model that comes out of Gallup research. It's called the Strength Finder. The idea here is we're going to have prospective franchisees and even current franchisees that come from successful lives before they became franchisees. So we want to know, does that VP of information technology, we know he's got great technical skills, but can he sell? Can he market? Can he manage a team? So we want to know what his strengths are so we can see if he can learn those skills and become good at those particular skills. So we use the Gallup model to do that. The last 2 pieces of sciences comes out of the University of Rochester and probably my favorite, Dr. Robert Nedford's work, which is a piece of sports psychology that looks at the ability for the franchisee to move from one part of the business to another without making mistakes or becoming hyper-vigilant in one particular area. And then the final piece of science is emotional and social intelligence. This logic comes from Dr. Daniel Goleman's research that looks at the emotional intelligence, which has to do with all of those markers around managing myself as a business owner, managing my time, my money, my budget, my thoughts, my emotions, my mouth. So it's about self-control, self-discipline, self-motivation. And then the social intelligence has to do with all of those markers around managing relationships, conflict management, team building, change catalysts, leadership skills. Those kinds of markers are the markers we are measuring. So I wanted to give you a quick kind of graphic to kind of wrap this up so you can kind of see what this meta-analysis is. Any one of these sciences you can get in the open market, and there are some really good assessments out there. What makes Zoracle unique is how we combine those studies into a single questionnaire and we report it out in franchise language, and we've written a set of algorithms that compares one science and one study to another. So if you're only using a personality test, science shows us that personality has less than a 3% correlation to performance. It's not enough information to know if someone's going to perform. On the other hand, we could do a skills test, and that will tell us how they're going to perform, but they may not be a cultural fit or fit within our stage of growth. So we want to know all of that information as quickly as possible on our prospective franchisees. And of course, the way that we do that is by looking at our current franchisees. So kind of recapping, there are 4 sciences that have to do with compatibility. Do they share your values? Do they fit within your stage of growth? Do they fit within your culture? And do they have similar personalities as your high performers? And then the competencies markers are the hard competencies as well as the soft competencies, including their ability to focus and emotional and social intelligence. So in the end, you're looking at a model where you're going to be better at having right fit franchisees that are compatible and they can perform well. They'll validate better, they'll retain better, they'll cost less to train and support, and of course they'll be happier campers and ramp up faster, and ultimately will have much better performance. So that's all I have for you. To you, Bruce.
Well, thank you very much, Rebecca. And that's a fantastic summary. David, I think you've got a question that you wanted to ask Rebecca.
Yeah, I think Rebecca, from a recruitment point of view, like it's phenomenal. But when you assess the entire franchise model and the franchisees, is there there's elements where franchisees are struggling that the support staff may have not identified? Does this profile, when you get those results back, can it be used as a tool for the support staff to actually go out and help these franchisees?
Absolutely. So what it does is it does a side-by-side comparison, prospective franchisee to our high performer, and then it does a gap analysis. So you quickly get a report back that says your candidate, scored a 132 in sales, and we're looking for a 168. So it quickly shows you where the gaps are. So can your onboarding team, your training team, your support team, your consultants out in the field can look at that gap analysis and where the biggest bang for the buck is. If I know this individual is having retention problems with his employees, and I look at his leadership skills and his team building skills and some other things, now I have an opportunity to support that franchisee to get better in those areas that maybe he or she is simply not aware of, that there's a blind spot in their lives, right? And so we can bring it forward and say, here's your gap analysis. Let's find some ways to get better at these particular things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Thanks, Dave. We might keep going, and what we'll do, if we've got questions, we can come back to you at the end. We've got some time allocated at questions. So thank you very much. We're going to hear a little bit from on the recruitment journey, so to learn a little bit more about territory mapping. So Tim, we'll go to you next.
Thanks for that, Bruce. What I thought we'd talk about today was obviously territory mapping and helping franchisors to establish the right number of territories for the right sorts of reasons to make it easier to attract the right franchisees. And so if we could move on to the second slide, please, Rosie. Yeah, the starting point is really, what are the commonly asked questions from franchisors around territory mapping? And they're really around how many territories can I create and how large should they be? Because of course, if the territories are too large, then the customer service ends up being impacted, and the penetration rate in terms of customer attraction falls off towards the edges of the franchise territories. And of course, if the territories are too small, then the franchisee's likely to be struggling to hit the sort of the revenue targets they were looking for. And then we start to look at, one of those questions that's often asked is around the boundaries. Should I use radiuses or a travel time or a suburb or a postcode? So we'll explore that a little bit today. And then also, I guess, finally, around the prioritized release of territories. So do I release them all at once, or do I phase them? And if I do choose to phase them, how do I choose which ones to let go first and which ones to hold on till later? So we'll explore that as well over the next 10 minutes or so. If we could flick through, please, Rosie, thank you. So some of the key requirements, I think, in terms of franchise territory mapping around, firstly, being very fact-based about the way these decisions are made. It's not good enough to use sort of gut feel. It's certainly not good enough to guess. It really is about being fact-based and transparent, because you need to be able to explain to the franchisees how these territories have been developed and why there's a sense of confidence around the potential in each of these. So one of the things you really need to start looking at is the threshold counts of variables, particularly variables that are relevant to your particular target market. So variables might be population, or population of a certain age band, or expenditure for your particular product category, so we can build some demand forecasts for your particular product category. Might be household income levels. But the important thing here, it has to be tailored to your particular business. So for example, if it was a educational franchise for young sort of students, then having a count of households isn't going to be all that useful for you. But focusing in on a count of children aged 4 to 12 might be particularly relevant. Or if it's an after school type of service, the number of schools in each of these franchise territories and the total number of school students at those schools would be the important factors. So it is about thinking about your target customer base and those variables that do exist that can be used to help you right size the territories. And then in respect to the boundaries, it's really important that the boundaries be easy to explain. Some franchisees will automatically say, oh, it's going to be a 5 kilometre radius or a 4 kilometre radius. Or more currently, people will talk about a travel time of 5 minutes or 7 minutes. That's all well and good, but it's very hard for the franchisees to understand what that actually means, and is what part of which suburbs are in my territory or not in my territory. And that can cause angst amongst your franchisees as you develop out the franchise, unless they're very clear about what their territories are. And so we'll explore that in a short while as well. So if we could jump to the next slide, Rosie. One of the things that's really important about establishing the right size for the franchise territories, understanding what's possible, is really to understand what's been done before. And so this is just a little example where there's a table here looking at the fitness sector in Australia, which is a sector that's being franchised quite heavily at the moment. And so one of the questions is, well, how large should my franchise territories be? Well, part of the answer to that is, well, let's look at what existing franchise systems have done. So if you look at a table like this for an F45, for example, there are 522 territories across Australia at the moment, and you can see the number of territories per city. We also would break that out by metro versus non-metro. And then in the section at the bottom of the table, you can look at the population per store or by franchise territory. So F45, for example, in Sydney have got 36,000 people per franchise territory, and Anytime Fitness at 35,000. So they're the high tide markers, if you like. So that's as far as anyone's gone so far in terms of penetrating those markets and establishing that maximum number of franchise territories. So as a franchisor, if you said, well, I'm going to have franchise territories of, each territory is going to have 20,000 people, you've then got to say, well, maybe, but nobody else has been able to get that deep to this point in time. So there'd certainly be a level of risk in establishing a franchise territory that size. If the territories were being created at a size of 35 or 40,000 people per franchise territory, that makes sense as you explain it to your franchisees and to the franchisees' financiers in terms of giving some confidence that the market potential is actually there. And then on the right-hand side of that table, you can also see how that starts to spread into the regional parts of the country as well, which are obviously particularly important and often overlooked from a franchising perspective as well, in terms of the depth of opportunity that really exists in those areas. You can see there, some of those brands, like an Anytime, for example, one store per 35,000 people in Sydney. But if you look across, other parts of New South Wales and regional Australia, it's nowhere near that level of penetration. So are they pushing hard enough in those areas? Interesting question. You could certainly run a pretty good argument to say there was significant opportunity to increase penetration in regional parts of the country when you look at some tables like that. I guess the key point here is about being data-led in terms of the conclusions we begin to reach, and de-weighting sort of personal opinion and sort of guessing and replacing it with some really solid data. And of course, this is fitness sector, but it can be replicated really for any existing franchise sector in the country. So whether it's educational services or restaurants or childcare, it doesn't really matter. Thanks, Rosie. We go to the next slide, please. This is an example of some territories that are created for a business, and this was particularly looking at Perth. What we're really trying to do here is develop an algorithm that establishes sort of a minimum population count in each of the territories. This is important because it means that as we create the territories across a city like Perth, then it means that all of our franchise territories achieved this minimum population threshold, which was the only variable used for this particular client. But equally, we're avoiding creating territories that are too large. And of course, too large becomes a problem as well, because those customers at the fringes or the outer edges of these territories, they're just not well serviced. So if it's a store-based franchise, what we find is that customers stop traveling after 5 or 6 minutes to get to that particular store. So the customer uptake towards the edges of these territories sort of drops off quite significantly. So there's an inability to fully penetrate each of these territories. So you certainly don't want them too big. In this case, we actually ran 2 scenarios, a 40,000 person minimum population count and a 50,000 person minimum population count, just to sort of create some of these options for this particular franchisor. And you can see here on these slides, we also included the number of major competitors in each, just to help the franchisor start to determine what the right number was for their business. And in this particular instance, this particular franchisor only had 1 existing store. So there wasn't a lot to learn from the existing network. It was more about, from their level of experience and expectation around business potential, what was the right size for this particular business. If you just jump to the next slide, please, Rosie. So this is a continuation actually of this same piece of insight for this particular client. One of the really important things here is to understand the relative potential within each of these trade areas. So they've all got 40,000 or 50,000 people, but what's using data, using what we know about the business, what's the potential now in each of these territories? Because they all have the same number of people, more or less, but they have different household income levels. And we know for this particular business that household income is also important. So in this case, we developed an attractiveness index, which is the column on the right-hand side. The attractiveness index in this case was a function of population, age-banded population. This particular business targets that sort of 25 to 50-year-old person, and then also household income. So by using those 3 factors, we created a demand metric, and then we indexed that so we could see relatively from the highest potential territory to the lowest potential territory that we've identified, where do they sit. So Fremantle at the top of the list has got an index of 100, and Jindalee on the bottom of the list has got an index of 51. What we also did for this particular franchisor, and this is really important, is we compared that index back to their known store. So they only have 1 store, and it's actually in Melbourne. So using that same territory analysis, and we looked at the population around in a 2 kilometre radius around their existing store, we used the same methodology to develop that same indexed demand number, which was 106. So it immediately gives the franchisor the ability to say, well, clearly Fremantle should be pretty strong, because it's very similar to what I'm doing at the moment in Melbourne. Similarly, any of those stores or franchise territories in the 90s, they're the no-brainers. They're the really easy ones. So that's where I'm going to start as I start franchising. But what we'd be very cautious about recommending is starting to release franchise territories towards the bottom end of that list, because it's certainly not to say that they won't be successful, because we don't, but we don't know yet, because stores haven't been built with in that type of territory to this point in time. So it's about starting with what you know, starting with where you know you're very likely to be successful, build confidence at that level, and come progressively down through that list. And it might well be in 2 or 3 years' time that Armidale or Jindalee ends up being a very successful territory for the franchisor. But we wouldn't suggest you jump in there straight away. It's certainly one that should come a little later in the growth of the business. So I think this de-risking the growth profile for the franchisors is particularly important, because of course, as you grow quickly, there is risk, and that's okay. All business people accept risk, but this is a case of de-risking where you can. So releasing these franchise territories in a systematic and planned way to maximize the probability of success through the early stages of growth until more confidence grows in the way that these businesses develop, which then makes them consequently easier to sell into the future.
So Tim, I might just pause for a sec to see if Dave, have you got any questions or comments on the property side of things and how it plays into with the territory mapping?
Yeah, I think very similar to the profiling piece, Tim. If you're an existing network and you've got established stores that are trading really, really well, can you take that data and overlay and try and find some resemblance or similarities to assist with taking out that guesswork?
Yeah, it's a good question, Dave. And in fact, the process is quite similar. So for franchisors that have an existing network of stores, what we look for in that case is, what does the catchment area look like around that particular store, around the whole network? And then use a regression process to identify what catchment characteristics or variables are more closely associated with high-performing stores versus low-performing stores. And we do that by different store location types. So whether it's a shopping mall store or a high street retail store or a commercial precinct store, to understand what are those catchment variables that are closely associated with high levels of performance. And then we look to identify locations around the country or around the city that have those same characteristics, but don't have a franchisor store within an area of, say, 3 kilometres or 4 kilometres. And that's what we call a hunting ground process. And it sits sort of hand in glove with this territory mapping process, particularly for those retail shop type of locations.
Thanks, Tim. We might have to keep going. So we've learned about profiling and now mapping. So the next thing, we've found our franchisee and we're going to find them some money. So Paul, the 4 C's of credit, tell us about that.
Yeah, morning everybody. Morning, Bruce. I'm going to confuse Rosie here, and I said I wouldn't share a presentation, but I've decided I would, just to make it more dynamic. So morning everyone. So yeah, here to talk about franchise lending. As Bruce said, I'm a general manager for credit risk for Queensland with Judo at the moment. So happy to take any questions as we go through the process. I guess my first kind of point is good bankers, like good tea, can only be appreciated when they're in hot water, and the similar position really for any business owner really. So whether you're in a franchise or just an independent business, it's really when things are boiling that those skills that you're coming in with and the relationships you've built across your network really come out to the fore. So I guess just as Bruce said, just today to talk through, I guess, the 4 C's of credit and what a bank would be looking at primarily in terms of assessing a finance application. And for Judo, we're very, very clear around these being our 4 C's and also in this order. So the number one thing for us is around character. And what does character mean? It probably goes to a lot of the things that Rebecca talked about, actually. Some of the things that Rebecca talked about in her presentation really resonated with me. Things like, the ability to exercise judgment. Do you have shared values with your franchisee, the franchisor, and indeed your bank? Do you have alignment between all parties in the relationship? How do you cope with crises in the business or stages of growth? What's the culture like, and what's the competency like, not only from you as a customer or as a franchisee, but across everyone in your network? So they're really critical things, and I think the points that Rebecca made were excellent, not only from a franchising point of view, but from a banking point of view as well. So really, before we get into the sort of 4 C's, the really critical thing to do when you're approaching a bank is to understand really what is driving that requirement for finance. So this might sound simple, but I can tell you from 25 years of experience in banking, sometimes people come to us and they actually don't really know what they need the money for. And again, that might sound silly, but really there's 5 really key things that a customer is coming to a bank for. To purchase a business, it's to refinance a business, to help grow a business, some working capital to meet requirements between when you're putting your cash out and when you're getting your cash in, or starting an establishment of a startup. So they're really critical things to kind of frame up in your mind and get clear before you approach the bank. And then the other critical thing is just having a really good understanding as a franchisee, as a customer, about how your business works. So what is the mix of activity that's occurring between what we call the 7 cash drivers? So how are your sales and your margins interplaying? How are your operating expenses going to be in this business? Are they fixed? Are they variable? Are you going to have debtors? Do you hold stock or inventory for a long time? Do you have creditors? And then what's your capital position going to be going in? And then what capital do you need longer term for that business over time? I'll skip that one. So obviously when you're purchasing a business, you're going to go out to a lawyer, most probably, get some advice. But some of the things the banks are going to be interested in is, you know, are you going to be buying a business name? Are you buying the shares in a company, or are you just buying the name? Do you get any patents or trademarks with that? Do you get websites and domain names? Are you buying a debtor book? Are you getting access to suppliers and trading licenses? Are you going to have a lease over a property, and can the bank take that as collateral? What plant and equipment are you going to get as part of the deal? Are you getting stock or inventory, or is that something that you'll have to do separately? If you're buying an existing franchise, are you taking on any liabilities or any employee entitlements? And other things such as intellectual property, your copyrights, and those types of things. Really important for both you as a franchisee and also the bank to understand exactly where you're at from that perspective. And then I guess the key thing is most franchises and most businesses these days is you're buying a component of goodwill. So do you actually understand how that goodwill is being made up? And can you explain that to the financier? So, you know, typically those things are some sort of multiple of an EBIT or an EBITDA or some sort of future earnings capability. So again, a really, really critical thing just to understand and be able to articulate that through to your financier. I'll just click through that. So in terms of character, I've kind of covered that already. One of Judo's big principles and our customer value proposition is that we meet every single customer because we're really big on understanding who we're lending to, having that face-to-face connection. So we're not a lender that just says you can only borrow 30% or 50% of the purchase price. We really start from that character perspective and get an understanding of what your experience and your history is like, and all of the things really that Rebecca spoke through about earlier on about your ability to exercise judgment, work with people, cultural fit, all that type of stuff is really important to us as a financier. In terms of capacity, so what we mean by capacity is your ability to repay the debt over a commercial period of time. And also, importantly, have enough money for you to enjoy yourself. The worst thing that we can do as a bank or any financier can do is give you so much debt that you're having to work 24/7 to repay that and you've got no lifestyle. So we really want to make sure that you guys as small business owners or business owners have a really good balance there in terms of being able to put time and effort into the business, but also into your personal life, your family life, and those sorts of things, and have enough cash to be able to live a good lifestyle as well. One of the key things for banks is really to understand both the historical position of the business, but also where it's going. So I kind of relate this to being looking through or looking into the rear vision mirror, seeing what's happened in the past, but also looking out the front window and saying, where is this business going? And how does a bank really, I guess, get some comfort or assess those things? Typically at Judo, we'd use what we call the CARS approach. So we'll take your historical financial data and we'll get your projected financial information, and we'll simply compare it. And then we'll understand what are the assumptions about the future that you're believing will happen or occur, and then make some assumptions around, well, is that realistic? Is that likely to happen? And some of the things that Tim talked about a little while ago would obviously factor into that. If you're going to expand into another region, is that likely to be a good region because of X, Y, and Z? And then as a bank, we'd also undertake what's called a sensitivity analysis, which we would always recommend a customer or a franchisee to do as well. So what if things don't quite go to plan and you may be only able to achieve 80% of your revenue targets in the first 3 or 6 months? How does that look? Have you got enough sort of capital and resources to get yourself through? The next big thing for us is capital. And there's really 2 elements to capital here. The first thing is how much capital can you bring into the transaction? As I said, Judo is not a bank that sort of says you're a franchise system, so we'll only lend you 30 or 50%. History tells us, 25, 30 years of history tells us it's very difficult for any business to borrow 100%, but somewhere between 50 and 80%, depending on cash flows and the ability to kind of repay that over a commercial period of time. You can generally get a transaction to work depending on the particular system and the cash flows of that. So obviously some level of capital into the business is really important. And then beyond that is how do you grow your capital? So is the business going to generate enough profit and cash for you to build your capital account up so that you can maybe refit the shop or buy a van? Or if you can't do that, are you able to then articulate what your needs are going to be in the next 12 to 24 months? And can that be financed? So getting a really good sense of what the capital requirements are over time, not just at the point of purchase, is really critical. And the final thing for us as a bank is around collateral. So do you have any property or other collateral that you want to provide as security? For us at Judo, collateral is very much the last question we ask. We're much more interested in your character, the ability of the business to repay the debt and the cash flows of the business. And then collateral is something that we look at towards the end of our assessment. So the key things we're interested in as we talk to customers is really what's the value and the saleability of this business going forward? Do you plan to actually sell this in 5 years' time, or are you going to sort of stay in it for a long period? And what other assets and resources do you have at your availability if something does go a little bit off track?
Paul, I'm going to just interrupt you there. I did realise just on the way through that we can't actually see your slides. So what we'll do is I'll get you to email the slides and we'll send
I will.
one afterwards.
Okay, my apologies for that.
No problem at all. So Alex from Blue Rock Finance, you work with a lot of franchise systems, and have you had a question for Paul?
Yeah, g'day Paul. So Alex here from the Blue Rock Finance team. Now, obviously, there's a lot of preparation that needs to go into seeking funding for franchisees. Mm-hmm. From your perspective, what's the expectation for these applicants seeking finance to have things like their SWOT analysis completed up front, cash flow forecast completed up front, versus what can they work with one of your bankers to, I suppose, get it into a format that's acceptable for Judo?
Yeah, so I think the more work, obviously, that a franchisee can do up front and get familiar with the business and provide, even if it's only a 1 or 2 page kind of business plan with some high level numbers, that really gives us the ability to then sit down and have that conversation, Alex, and work through the details. So we're not necessarily asking people to come with a 400 page business plan or anything like that. Obviously, to get to the stage of sort of looking at finance, most people have done some homework. They're interested in that system. They've done a high-level financial type of review. Does this make sense for them to invest in? That's the perfect time to have that initial conversation with one of the bankers and kind of start working through the process.
Thank you.
Paul, can I ask you a quick one, mate?
Yes.
Bricks and mortar leases, loans, around that sort of space. Is there a sweet spot for terms? Can one lease be too long, or obviously it can be too short because you want to try and get your money back before the lease is out? But
Yeah.
because particularly with the major landlords, they're going to start getting a lot more flexible about that. So I'm just interested to see, is there a target that we should be aiming for that you guys are really comfortable with?
It's a difficult question just to give you a number, but I guess at a high level, we'd always prefer the lease on the premises to be at least as long as, if not a year longer than the term of the loan. So, most franchise loans have traditionally been kind of 5 years, sometimes a little bit longer. So most of the time, we do some franchising out beyond that, 7 type years. We've even done a couple at 10, when they're multi-stores. So it doesn't preclude us from, if you've got, say, 3 or 4 sites, and 1 or 2 of those has got a shorter lease term, doesn't mean that it's an automatic no. It's just about us sort of having a look at it and seeing from a cash flow perspective what would happen if you couldn't renew one of those leases. But I think the high level is the longer you can get, particularly probably in the current market where there might be some good opportunities to lock in some decent terms and conditions. It's probably not a bad idea.
Yep. Cool.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, John. I'm going to throw to Ben now, just to summarise. And Ben, I know you've got a bit of information to share, so if we might run over a little bit past our scheduled finish time, but we will send these slides through to everyone as well that joined today. So Ben, how's it all fit together?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. And everyone else out there, thanks for sticking with me. I realise that the shutters probably start to come down to the stage of a webinar, so I'll move through this at a clip. So excuse me if it sounds like a bit of a race call, but I'm mindful of your time. So, we've had some great insights today regarding finding, best franchise applicants, finding the best site territory, and getting your system and candidates in the best place to acquire lending. And that boils down to our mantra at BDC, which is, franchising, great location, great candidate, great system. Now, it sounds really easy when you say it out loud, but the reality of that's somewhat different, as we all know. So what I want to talk through quickly is how we can actually tie this all together to help you achieve targeting and recruiting high caliber applicants. So what we do firstly is a deep dive. So we would come out and work with you and do an uncovery session. Can we assist with location intelligence? Territory mapping and network planning can be an expensive and time-consuming exercise. However, the cost of not having a defined growth strategy far outweighs the initial investment. Okay. However, though, through our partner with Tim and his team at GapMaps, we've been able to design some really great cost-effective strategies to help you achieve your network planning goals, dependent on where you are as a system and the size of your system. What we also dig into is how are you stacking up with the banks? Are you talking to the banks in the language that they understand? Are you providing the insights they're looking for? We, again, can help you out here. No point in having a great recruitment tool and process if the banks won't lend or can't understand what you're trying to tell them. So some great points there that were raised before. But we also work with Fran Data, and we can assist you getting lender friendly. And as with GapMaps, we build out some great packages based on where you sit within your level of growth. Then what we do is a complete review of your current recruitment workflow. What are you doing now? What works? What doesn't? Where are the gaps? What are the fundamentals that we need to remain in play? What's your marketing collateral look like? How can we improve? So it's a full end-to-end analysis. So what we then do is take us into a tailored workflow. So we can build out a tailored workflow depending on the level of the partnership. So by this, I mean, do you require end-to-end recruitment from all the way from lead generation to the execution of documents and all the way through to settlement? Or is it a highly qualified lead generation strategy that we need to do for you, or is it somewhere in between? We take that tailored approach. It's not a one-size-fits-all. And then from lead generation to inquiry, we can provide a fully integrated solution build out landing pages, assist with design and UX, or you can simply add a widget to your Inquire Now page that will see the applicant fall into the sales pipeline that will then manage for you on your behalf. Again, we just take that tailored modular approach. If you've got something in place that works, however, through restructure, you've had to pull back on your recruiting team, we can slot in there, or we can do the full end-to-end process. What we don't do is take an autocratic approach and dictate what the process needs to be. For us, it's about integration and partnership into your business. We then build out the workflow, and that's actually then built into our CRM tool, which I'll get to shortly. And from that point, we start to review once this thing gets going. No one's going to get it 100% bang on the first time. We've got to remember we're dealing with human beings here, and what might seem like an absolute slam dunk on a slick looking PowerPoint presentation for workflow might be far from the reality. So we go through that process. Then what we move into is the profiler stage. Now, I won't spend too much time on here. Rebecca did a great job of explaining how that works, and I think it, it really shows why we've partnered with the Oracle team. So what it tells us is who we're looking for based on your stage of growth. As mentioned before, if you're at 10 units, it's going to be very different to who you're looking for at 50 units. What are the attributes that we need to look for in an applicant based on your successful franchise partner within your network? I can't stress enough the value that we place on this tool. I've used some fantastic profiling tools in the past, but I haven't seen anything nearly as accurate or user-friendly as the Oracle Profiler. And as mentioned before, the beauty of this, it benchmarks against the top performers in your network, not just within an industry or a category. It's the people that work in your system at your stage of growth. The fixed cost, okay, for usage, so you can have 1, 200, 2,000 profiles completed in a month. It makes no difference. So there's no surprises. You don't blow your budget. You don't lose out on opportunities because there could be a particular spike in a category. Maybe all of a sudden people want to get into pizza or bakeries because they've seen that they've traveled well throughout the pandemic. You're not going to get penalized for that inquiry. Now, out of the profiling piece, and we could spend an entire session on this, is we are able to develop a marketing blueprint. So through the profiling, we now know the applicant, the type of applicant that we need to bring into your network based on their attributes, capabilities, competencies, and compatibility. So we know who we're going after. So, fish where the fish are is, what I've always said, but more importantly, know the fish you want to catch, okay? So we're able to identify that. So gone are the days of just throwing your message out to a pool of people looking to buy a franchise, okay? We've all been there, we know the result. A lot of time, effort, and energy spent on someone who's never going to be the right fit for the network. Plus, no one's got the budget anymore to go across multiple mediums. So as I mentioned, based on the identified profiling and the benchmarking of the franchise partner applicant that we actually want to now attract and bring into the system, we can provide you with a detailed strategic marketing document called the marketing blueprint. So this can be used to assist with lead generation activity, lead nurturing during the recruitment process. It can be applied internally. So once they're in the system, how do you communicate to them in training all the way through to weekly and monthly comms that go out to the network? So the idea is talk to them in a language that they're going to hear, okay? Because they have certain markers that they'll react to, and I'll go into these. As I said, we could spend the entire session on the blueprint, but to give you an overview of the level of detail that this document will include is your ideal applicant's core values, fears, considerations. It's going to give you guidance on copy specifications and guidelines. It's the fonts that they like, the colors they engage with, graphics and layouts. We also are going to provide you with a really detailed list of keywords and then guidance on media selection as well as examples of ads within this document. So again, it's, in particular keywords. So for your SEM and your SEO strategy that you have in place, you're going to know what you're going to get a reaction from in the type of applicant that we want to attract and bring in. So it's allowing you to get a lot more cost effective and smarter with your marketing dollars. And sitting underneath all of this is hundreds of hours of neuroscience research. I'm not even going to try to explain it because this would be another session that we could do in this alone. It's quite amazing. Then what we can do is we go into pipeline and CRM management. So part of being a BDC franchise recruitment client is that you gain access to Salesforce and our Salesforce marketing and lead nurturing platform, Pardot. So ultimately, any kind of recruitment pipeline is a numbers game. You can't get away from that fact. So for us at BDC franchise recruitment, it's about working with smart numbers. And what we do is we take a less is more approach, move away from throwing off at the wall and hope that it sticks attitude. However, what we do believe in is recruit hard, manage easy. And we work with you on developing, as I said, the workflow and the requirements of people coming in. So interest in your franchise system, it has a lifespan. So through our pipeline management CRM, we can get to the best prospects first and work them through the required stages of the pipeline at the required pace. And we do that by scoring the applicants in terms of their level of engagement and their journey so far through the inquiry, how they interact. And we, to the point is we can track up to 20, 30 websites that they visited prior. So again, when we start to get enough data to provide reports that have value, all of a sudden we know where you can potentially put your marketing, digital marketing dollars based on their journey into your actual inquiry. So what we also do is reporting. Reporting is detail provided for, like for analysis. And what we can do is we can identify where the blockages, the leaks, and where we are, and we work in collaboration with you as a franchisor in our weekly whips, how to best tackle these issues that occur in any pipeline. So it's about making decisions about not what we think, but what we know. So what we're able to identify is why certain applicants aren't moving past the stage, or why they're closing out, or what's the reason for them not progressing within the desired time frame. And we can actually pull this apart and then adjust what we need to ensure that we actually get that pacing through the pipeline as tight as we can and within reason. From that, it's about what we are able to provide is lead nurturing, okay? Relevant conversations with applicants at relevant times. I'm a huge believer in there's 2 times to plant a tree, and that's now 30 years ago. So what we do through Pardot, we develop an automated lead nurturing program that will be triggered by the stage of the pipeline that they're in and by the days in stage. So again, helping them to move through it. It's about ensuring engagement levels stay high and keeps the emotional pacing moving forward, which is critical to any franchise recruitment process. Is that people get excited, they back off, they move forward, they back off. It's how to bring them to that next level so they continue that journey. So for example, what we could do, we could have an applicant who's in the due diligence phase of the process. So it might be stage 3, stage 4. We could have a video that automatically fires off, where we could have the incredibly handsome Bruce McFarlane could give a relevant talk on the importance of due diligence, what you need to consider. It could be along the lines of why you should use a franchise specialist law firm. We've all been there when you're dealing with an applicant who's engaged a conveyancing lawyer reviewing FAs. So it's almost this third-party neutral information to help them continue through, but also make them aware of what they need to be doing at that actual relevant time. They might be in the stage where they need to consider commercial leases. Automated video can be deployed that talks around FAQs on leases. So we could have the lovely John Sully and the guys from BDC Property shoot off. It could be the FAQ. All right. What's a bank guarantee? What's a landlord contribution? What's the difference between net rent, post rent? Because I think it's worth noting, people sometimes are too afraid to ask these kind of questions. They don't want to feel stupid because they feel they should know. They don't want to think, God, if I ask this, they're going to think I don't know enough about getting into a commercial lease or a franchise system, and I'm going to get pinged. A solid lead nurturing campaign can help in this space, and it all ties into their journey through that tailored workflow down your sales pipeline that we can actually manage and run for you and continue to monitor and update. I'm mindful now we're 11 minutes over, so that's it for me. As I mentioned, this is a very holistic overview of how we can help you to attract and recruit high quality applicants. Happy to discuss on an individual basis in far greater detail how we can assist you in this space, because it's a detailed process. So, you know, we've just sort of scratched on the surface, but, you know, we take an integrated partnership approach of recruitment into your system.
No worries. We might just stop the share. I think that's Rosie's got the share on. Or thanks very much, Ben. And yeah, we probably haven't got time for any questions, but thank you for that. Thank you to Rebecca, Paul, and Tim as well for your presentations. They were fantastic. Bruce or John or Dave, any closing comments before we jump off for the day?
Yeah, Dave, if you got something. Oh, look, I was just going to say, Dave, just while you're getting yourself ready, this stuff is what we've gone through here, and particularly what Ben and Dave have put together is cutting edge. Make no doubt about it. And using Zoracle, that this is the future. But at the end of the day, you've still got to, from a sales point of view, you've got to do all that sort of stuff. You still have to ask the question, are you going ahead with the deal and close the deal? So I know Ben, particularly his track record in this sort of stuff is second to none. And I think that you have to have all these fantastic processes and risk management and everything that's been put in place. You still have to sell the franchise. So that's one of the things I think we are doing very, very, very well as well. So I just wanted to add that on top of what we've talked about here. So, Dave?
Yeah, I suppose the whole concept of BDC, and particularly around recruitment, is we're putting the right people into the right system in the right location with the right clients. And as we all know, if you get those foundations right, you expect long tenure, less support, less headaches, and explosive growth from multiple unit development as well. So we've reversed engineered the whole recruitment process to Ben's point, to put in a very, very detailed approach with tools that not every franchisor can afford. And basically we provide these tools as part of our process. So, but yeah, thanks a million, guys. That was exceptionally well. I'd like to thank particularly Paul, Rebecca over in the US, and Tim, and well done to my business partner Ben. That was exceptional.
So well done to everyone, and thank you again for joining us, for all of the attendees and sticking with us. I failed again as the MC to try and keep it to time, but you know, I'm looking for. So if there's anyone wants to run the gig, I think Darren's looking to put his hand up to be our next MC for the next one. For all of those people in Victoria, I'm going to do a little plug, a separate one. It'd be great to catch up. We've got a Franchise Council of Australia drinks on the 10th of December at Welcome to Brunswick. So it'd be really good if anyone's in Victoria to see people face to face. Now we're allowed out of our houses. So hopefully see you before Christmas. But otherwise, thanks again for joining us, and take care and enjoy the day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.